So let's now move on to the second talk, which in this schedule is the third one. This is by Dr. Rory McGreal, and he'll be talking on online learning and open educational resources, challenge of the future with a glimpse at the past. So Professor McGreal, he's a professor in the Center for Distance Education at Athabasca University in Alberta, Canada. He is also the UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning chairholder of Open Educational Resources, and he is also the director of the Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute, TECRI. Previously, he was the executive director of Tele-Education New Brunswick, which actually is a bilingual distributed distance learning network. He has received PhD degree in computer technology. Rory has several firsts actually. So he was the founder of the world's first e-learning website for tele-education and one of the world's first metadata learning project repositories. He has received several awards, too many to actually speak out. You can find it in the book. So over to you, Rory, to talk on the online learning efforts.
Are we ready to go? Hello, hello, hello. As the Bobby said to the man with the three heads. I'm going to talk today why we in education and our libraries have to take the lead in this aspect of education, why we must move to open educational resources. Not that it's a good thing to do, but that it's needed in education. These slides are all under a Creative Commons open license, international license. Some of the images are under fair dealing or fair use. I'm going to go right back to get to the basics of my argument. Is this: we live in a world where the economic drivers are no longer manufacturing and transportation. Now the economic drivers are computers and telecommunications. The world that many of us grew up in, I see a lot of young people who were born in this world, but for many of us, we did not grow up in this world. We grew up in another world. It is quite different. It's based on bits. Nicholas Negroponte reminds us that when we're working with computers, we hear voices, we compute with data, we see the images, but really what we're talking about are bits of information. Characteristic of these bits: there's no mass, they have no volume, you can reproduce them infinitely at virtually no cost, and they move at the speed of light. We envision them as zeros and ones. They are not zeros and ones. It's because our feeble minds, in order to understand the phenomenon, need to symbolize them in some way. In fact, we're talking about on-off switches. That's all they are. So, we have all these on-off switches, and we have two memory sticks here. One of them is worth $150,000. The other one is worth $1.50. What's the difference? The only difference is that the zeros and ones on one of them are arranged differently from the zeros and ones on the other. The world economy is based on that difference. when we talk about the knowledge economy, people seem to take some kind of a magical view of it and don't understand what the implications are of that. But the knowledge economy is based on bits of information. The world economy is based on that difference, the difference between the arrangement of zeros and ones. Taiichi Sakaya, a Japanese author, wrote The Knowledge Value Revolution. And he told us that really what we're trading in is knowledge. And so, for example, you take a bottle like this, a plastic bottle. What are you buying? And people think, well, we're buying the bottle. No, the plastic in there is pretty well worthless, 0.01 cent. What we're buying is the knowledge that's embedded in that bottle. If we, in northern Alberta, we have tar sands about the size of England, where the solid oil is just sitting on the ground. We dig it up with bulldozers, and we convert it into oil and sell it. But what do we have up there? What we're buying when we buy the oil is the knowledge that's been embedded in those sands, in those tar sands. If it was not for knowledge workers, all we would have there is a pile of mud and tar. What we're buying is the knowledge embedded in that object by educated people. Well, guess what? As educators, what's our job? Our job is the production and transmission of knowledge. We are at the very center, the epicenter of the knowledge economy. And too many of us don't realize that and feel that we are playing some kind of peripheral role. So let's get real and understand, one, what's happening in the world, and two, our place in the world. The largest company in the world today is Alphabet, the owner of Google. Microsoft is another of the largest companies. Apple. These are the largest companies in the world. They are bigger than Exxon and Mobil and General Electric. Far bigger. And what do they produce? What does Alphabet produce? Nothing. All they do is rearrange ones and zeros. That's all they do. The world economy is based on rearranging ones and zeros. And we're talking about the vast majority of the world economy. We need to understand that to understand our position in that economy. UNESCO in 2012 with the Paris OER Declaration stated that open educational resources are important if we are to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 4, education for all. And if we are talking about a knowledge economy, we must have education for all. We must have continuous education for all. And we have groups around the world, none yet from India. I would invite you to have a chair, but there are open education resource chairs in many countries. And we see, as educators, that the challenge for the 21st century is this, that by 2025, about 100 million new students capable of post-secondary education, capable of full participation in the knowledge economy, will not have access to post-secondary education, either because they don't have it in their region or because they can't afford it. This is a disaster for the knowledge economy. We need those educated people. If we were to look and address this problem, using traditional universities, we would have to build 4 universities per week of 30,000 students in order to address this problem. We know this is impossible. We need to find new ways of bringing education to large masses of students. The question for educators in the 21st century, how to educate all these learners. Not just a question for educators, but for society, if we're talking about living in a knowledge economy. You can find out about open education resources, if you're not familiar with them, by going to call.org. They have quite a few good free books available on that. The internet is the biggest commons. It is the public domain, is a priceless shared heritage. All knowledge comes from previous knowledge. There is no such thing as a new original idea. All original ideas, all knowledge comes from what went before. And we are now putting it and making it available, and this is an eminent project of a library in India. It's an example to the world of a digital library, making sure that we put this knowledge, make it available on the internet to everybody. Historically, Tom Harper reminds us that the concept of copyright was utterly foreign to the ancient mind. In fact, people who copied were the most respected people in society. It was just considered a holy and sacred activity to copy. And today, with copyright, this changes in copyright law, they're trying to make out that people who copy are criminals. Columbkill, or St. Columba, as he's known otherwise, was responsible for the first copyright law in Ireland. He copied St. Finian's psalm book, and the king said he was not allowed to do that. The king said, to every cow its calf, to every book its copy. And they fought in the west of Ireland. 3,000 people were killed, and St. Columba won. He did not get his strict copyright regulations. But what is copyright, and what's the origin of copyright? Copyright was instituted to encourage learning and promote the progress of science and the useful arts. It was not brought in to protect the rights of the author. In fact, it was brought in to limit the rights of the author to 17 years, giving them a monopoly for 17 years, renewable for another 17 years. And now it's been morphed by major companies and profiteers into now, in most countries, 70 years after the death of the author. 50 years in Canada, but there's pressure on us to move up. Jassy refers to the copyright laws we have today as para-copyright or pseudo-copyright. But the Statute of Queen Anne, the first copyright law that all common law countries trace their copyright laws to, is pretty clear why copyright was instituted. An act for the encouragement of learning. It was not an act to protect the rights of authors. The American Copyright Act, an act to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. Again, not to protect authors. In fact, President Jefferson put it this way, that its peculiar character is that no one possesses the less because every other possesses the whole of it. He receives an idea from me, receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me. So when somebody takes something and copies it, They take nothing from you. The big publishers are saying, oh, they're stealing our works. No, they're not stealing your works, because to steal is to take something away from somebody. To take something and they still have it is not stealing. In fact, the legal term for it is infringement. Jefferson also said, I said on this ground, which I suppose to be self-evident, that the earth belongs in usufruct to the living, that the dead have neither powers nor rights over it. That is now 70 years after the death of the author, they're controlling us in what we do. I can give a personal example of this. My sister wants to be buried in a cardboard box. She wants to make her husband and her brother look cheap. It's called control beyond the grave. Even after she's dead, she wants to get at us. So I've had personal experience with this, and it's the same with copyright law. 70 years after they're dead, they're still controlling us and what we do. Jefferson said that inventions cannot be a subject of property. And Madison put it this way, incentive, not property or natural law, is the foundational justification for American copyright. It is a privileged monopoly. Copyright is a monopoly. It is not what they call it, intellectual property. And John Perry Barlow warns us that companies protecting their copyright is one of the main dangers to civil rights and civil society. What does copyright really mean? Nobody owns ideas. They belong to everybody. Copyright holders possess a copyright, not a property right, a copyright. Copyright protects the expression of ideas, not the ideas. And the holders have a limited right to control the expression of their ideas for a limited time. That is what you call a monopoly. It does not mean droit d'auteur, the right of the author. This is the European tradition. This is not in the common law tradition. And they like to use the term intellectual property, the big publishers, etc., cinematographers. They like to use the word property because, as William Blackstone says, there's nothing which is so generally strikes the imagination and engages our affections as the right of property. They love the term property. Lawrence Lessig tells us monopoly controls have been the exception in free societies. They have been the rule in closed societies. So, that's why we in education need to start thinking in terms of open educational resources. There's a UN definition. I'm assuming that people here know this, that it's open educational resources are free to use and adapt however you like. And they're not just text, they could be videos, they could be audio, they could be games, quite a few different things. In fact, who here, have you heard of the unit of measurement called a twitch? You know what a twitch is in English, eh? This. Well, a twitch in video games is equal to 2 jiffies, or 200 milliseconds. Guess what? In 200 milliseconds, electrons on a wire travel 20,000 kilometers. There is nowhere on Earth further away than 20,000 kilometers. What does that tell us? That the world was made perfectly for playing video games. And we as educators need to understand this, and we need to start looking at game-based learning. That's not the topic today, but game-based learning is a very powerful learning technique. So, open education resources, we can mix them, we can adapt them, we can extract them, we can localize them, we can translate them, we can reuse, repurpose. Any way we want to use them, we can use them. They're open, they can be augmented, edited, customized, aggregated, reformatted, we can make mashups. They're so flexible, we can do anything we want with them as educators. We can assemble courses rather than building courses from scratch. We can assemble them like Lego sets, put courses together from material that already exists. They benefit faculty. In some of the impacts that we've studied of implementations of OER, faculty have very much said, wow, the sharing is increased, collaboration is increased, the quality of the content is increased, the flexibility, legal, technical, and pedagogical. So you're flexible legally, you can do what you want with them with not worrying about copyright laws. Technically, you can move them from any system you want, and pedagogically, you can use any kind of pedagogy on them. You can change your pedagogy as you like. The benefits faculty have recognized, it's brought in, it's given them an excuse to try new pedagogies. It's reduced their time to produce courses. They're able to adapt the courses to their needs. No duplication, updating content. The technology has been used effectively. There's been more time for research. They got recognition for creating and adapting this material. So all kinds of benefits to faculty and benefits to students because of that. But the big benefit to students are those is the cost of textbooks. And then this is a big issue in the United States and Canada. Huge difference, the increasing cost of textbooks, huge savings for students. But there's not just savings for students. We're finding that achievement levels rise because they can get the book sometimes before the course. Usually with commercial text, they get the book a few weeks after the course, if they get it at all. Retention, so students stay longer. The quality of content is better according to students. Innovative teaching. The technology formats are open, so they can use the OER on whatever device they have, and it's easy to access open educational resources as opposed to commercial. For the administration, there's cost savings using free material. More retention means more dollars for the institution. It brings in new open policies for the institution. And to be an open education resource, you need open licensing. And the principal one we use is Creative Commons. And Creative Commons, you can decide what restrictions you put on them. You can keep it wide open, CC BY, attribution. And all that means anyone can use it however they want. You just have to say who the author is, which you must do anyway as educators, because if you don't, that's plagiarism. Share alike means anyone else can use it any way they want, but they must keep the same license. The two on the right are more restrictive and they have special purposes. No derivatives means you can't change it. And this is usually used for scholarly articles where they don't want you to change anything. And the last one is non-commercial, and that is if you think somebody's going to make money out of it, you want them to come to you, and you can make money. But the way forward is this. All publicly funded content should be openly licensed. I mean, it's a travesty that it is not openly licensed, public content. In fact, in the U.S. Constitution, all public government resources are in the public domain. But they've been funding for many years, and the content's been taken by commercial publishers. But now they're insisting on open licensing. Canada is, Britain is, Australia, many other countries are now insisting on open licenses. I want to go back again because this is all tied in with online learning. Because online learning is the way we live and work and educate in a knowledge economy. There's two ways of looking at it. You can take the scientific method, here's the facts, what conclusions can we draw from them? Or we can take the creationist method, here's the conclusion. What facts can we find to support it? Well, we find in too many countries, there is a creationist view of education that dominates. They believe that at some time in the past, God or the gods created the classroom and no other form of education could possibly be any better or be of any value. And there's many people who still believe that in different countries. But here's the facts. In the Western tradition, the Library of Alexandria started the classroom. And they started the classrooms for one reason, and one reason only, and it was not a pedagogical reason. They started the classroom because there was only one copy of the manuscript. The only way they could teach the students the knowledge embedded in the manuscript was by bringing them into a room. That is the origin of the classroom. Well, today, we have no trouble copying. We can make 1 million copies available. The internet will make it available to everybody. So there's no possible reason why we need a classroom in the modern age. St. Paul, even back then, he sent epistles all around the known world. Distance education. He was already educating people at a distance even before the Library of Alexandria. So distance education has been around a lot longer. Now we have online education, which is a technological form of distance education. The medieval university, same thing, they had the classroom. Why? Because Gutenberg, with his press, he created these big books that are this big, and they had a lock on them. And the professor would come into the classroom, the lecturer, unlock the book and look to the page he read before, and he'd read. And that was the only way you could learn. So they had to have a classroom. But along came this guy, Aldus Manutius, or Aldo Manuzio in Italian, in the 15th century, and he came up with the idea of the portable book. You could have a book this size and put it in your saddlebag and bring it with you wherever you wanted to go. Oh, and by the way, how about a table of contents and page numbers and some things like that? He made it possible so as anyone could learn on their own. They did not need to be in a classroom to learn. They could access the material in a portable book. And now we have something far more powerful than a portable book. We have the internet. We have access, possible access to all of the world's knowledge. I call the people who are still pushing the classroom as the way to learn, we call them the educational Amish. We have people in Canada who choose to live in the 19th century. They do not want to change. And we have them, the people who keep pushing classroom education as the one-all and the be-all. We believe they're people, they want to live in the 19th century. They didn't adapt to the 20th century, and they have no place in a modern economy in the 21st century. Tom Russell has a site, no significant difference phenomenon, because I want to stress this point. There is no evidence whatsoever that classroom-based learning is better than online learning. I want to repeat that. There is no evidence. I'm not saying, that there's a sort of an argument and some say this and some say that. No, there is no evidence whatsoever that classroom-based learning is better than online learning. And there are about 500 studies that regardless of the technology or the media, there's no significant difference for learning. Distance education, it's like Cinderella has become a princess. Now in Canada and in the United States and many parts of Europe, and I hope in India, is we do not have traditional classroom-based learning that does not have some online component. 20% of students now in North America take online courses. And I was reading, or I heard the other day here, that the government limits you to 20% of MOOCs. You can get your degree with 20% MOOCs. Why? It should be the opposite. It should be 20% in the classroom. A modern student needs to learn online. This is the modern world. We're not living in the 19th century anymore. They need to be online. That is part of a modern education. In fact, it should be the opposite. 80% online, 20% in the classroom, and after a while you could even get rid of the classroom. Mobile learning is another aspect. I was in the Philippines in 1999, and I was driving through a small village with no electricity, and I slammed on the brakes because I could not believe what I saw. It was a farmer in a field behind 2 oxen up to his knees in a rice paddy, and he was digital messaging. In 1999, nobody in Canada was digital messaging. Zero. And I was shocked when I saw this. I checked it out and I found out there was more digital messaging per capita in the Philippines than any other country in the world. And I checked it out last few months ago. It's still the most digital messaging per capita in the world. But when I saw that device, I realized that device is a computer. It's more powerful than the computer I had on my desk 2 years earlier. And that's when it hit me that this is a way we can reach people all over the world. And I'm putting this slide out because I made it in 2006, because I was absolutely amazed. Look at all the things this thing can do. A book, a radio, a telephone, computer, PDA, game player, fax, camera, web browser. I was amazed. And now you laugh at this. There's 1 million applications. There's at least 100,000 medical applications that you can use your mobile device for. Oh, and by the way, you can use it as a phone as well. Although my sons never phone home. They never phone their mother. It's all messaging and everything else. But anyway, pervasive computing. There's 2 billion internet connections. The world population is 7.5 billion. 1/4 of the world's population is on the internet. The world is going mobile. We need to design and make sure that content is available on mobile devices. 4 billion mobile devices, 2 billion mobile internet users. 1 out of 3 only access the internet via mobile. And there's some there. We need to design for mobile first. Now, I want to talk about a horrible piece of technology, digital rights management, or digital locks. When you get commercial content, they have a digital lock on it, and it can cause all kinds of havoc. Any obstacle that makes a record harder to listen to is bad news for the artist that made it. The Sony rootkit actually, that scandal about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they put DRM into the operating system and it destroyed your operating system. So what they do with the DRM is you can't copy and paste, text to speech, format change, move material, print it out, move geographically, use it after an expiry date. All the things that we were learning earlier that we wanted for inclusiveness, you can't do with commercial content. They do not allow you to use your text-to-speech device with commercial content. DRM needs deep permissions into the operating system, It can stop normal operating system functions. They put in access codes that you have to pay up to $200 to get your information. But here's the catch. Our device is our property. DRM restricts our freedom to use our property. Remember, intellectual property is not property, it's a monopoly. And their monopoly restricts our freedom to use our devices. Here's a simple question. Can we not own and control our own property? They put handcuffs on our devices, but we're innocent. We've done nothing wrong. And Cory Doctorow puts it, there's no theory of capitalism that says that my private property should be regulated by the state. Many of us have seen this one. Oh, what happened? I'm stopped there. How many have seen Error 53? I hope nobody. Yeah, I hope nobody's seen it. Because if it's on your Apple device, if you get that, the device will no longer work. And that is if you take your Apple device to be fixed by a non-Apple dealer, and then the next time you upgrade the operating system, you'll get that. Now, digital licenses reinforce the digital locks. But my time is up, so I'm going to run through this with all the digital locks and just get to the end. You remember the world we used to live in where you bought something and you got it? We're in a new world now. You buy it and you don't get it. They own it. I don't know why it stopped working. So, everything you know is wrong. Every day computers are making our people easier to use. And innovation always produces hostility among those who prosper in the old paradigm. So I'll finish with that, and thank you very much for your attention. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here.
So time for questions, and I think after such a thought-provoking talk, we'll have lots of questions.
It's very informative talk. So the classroom teaching, it will give you a competitive, with the competitive pressure, students learn. If my sidey is learning or my neighbors are learning, I'll also learn. But individually, if everything is online, we don't know whether students are learning or not. So that's an issue or what's your comment on that?
What makes you think you don't know whether they're learning? You don't give them tasks to do and check their tasks? Do you do that in the classroom? You do it online. You give them tasks to do. They give you the tasks and you check them. Yes, they know how to do this. You give them an exam. You do it. You can check them online. We have software now where we can check and invigilate people online. Okay. Yeah, so you can do it. But I'll tell you, any student who's graduating today who doesn't know how to use the internet is not a graduate. They are not a modern educated person.
Thank you.
So can we, that means by the arrival of OER, that means learning swimming without the swimming pool?
Sorry, learning
swimming without a swimming pool.
Learning and swimming without a
by virtual means, online somebody shows that this is the learning, this is swimming, and some student can learn simulated type.
Yeah, learning to swim without a swimming pool? No, but you can't swim in a classroom either, can you? I had that from nurses saying, well, you're training your nurses, how can a nurse make a bed online? Because we train over half of the graduate nurses in Canada are online university. And they say, well, how can she learn how to make a bed online? And I say, oh, how can she do it in a classroom? She has to go out to the hospital and make the damn bed.
another question? I have a question. So, then I can understand that there is no difference between, no evidence that online learning is any worse than classroom learning. But one thing that I feel personally is in a classroom learning, or whenever there is a teacher whom you can talk to, there's an inspiration factor which might not be there or might be much less. So teacher inspires along with disseminating knowledge. So
you have inspiring teachers in India. We don't. We have classes of 300 students all sitting in an auditorium listening to a lecture, and every once in a while, if you're lucky, you meet an inspiring teacher. I did my master's degree at Dalhousie University in Canada on site, and we went on strike, the master's students. Do you know what our demand was? To meet our professor once a month. That's a traditional university. I took my PhD online at a distance, and I had contact with my professor anytime I wanted to. Within 24 hours, I had contact with her. She was wonderful, and the other teachers I had in my PhD program, my contacts were right away online on the internet. So to say, if it's so great, this personal inspiration in traditional universities, why don't they do it? They don't do it. They talk about it, but they don't do it.
Yeah. So I had just the opposite experience. A lot of my teachers are here actually. And I agree, they taught less and inspired more. Teaching was mostly online. Inspiration was the main part.
But at the graduate level, it's more real, isn't it? You're working directly with them.
Yeah.
Sir, why you people want your professor once in a month actually? Could you please explain?
What? I don't understand.
Sir, you said people made some agitation or a strike to get your professor once in a month.
Yes.
Actually, what is the reason behind of this? Then what is the result after a strike? Professor has come once in a month, or professor has come early?
Yes, we won. They had to meet with us at least once a month. And again, I had an inspiring teacher. I met him once a week. He was not one of the ones that weren't meeting with their students very often. So yes, we can. There are inspiring teachers. There's a lot of us are here. Yes.
Okay, so thanks for the great talk again, and I'm sorry we have to stop here because we have another talk.
Thank you very much.
I have the privilege on
thank you
behalf
very
of the
much.
organizer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Video